The Long Way Home, Chapter 27, Adjusting. The planet didn't exactly have a name. The malevolent minds, who thought themselves masters of the galaxy, had a long designation for it in their charts with some annotations. Namely, it had a high, according to them, gravity, possessed a breathable atmosphere, animal life, and suitable extensions. And most recent visitors might call the place something like that one place with the heels of a no fish, and the natives called it something that would roughly translate to this place here where we hide. What the place was called didn't matter. What did matter is what was happening on said planet. The malevolent minds who thought themselves the rightful rulers of all had sought to take yet more of the natives for use as psychically controlled appendages, and had found more than they had bargained for. Conversely, a small group of intrepid travelers had halted there to celebrate and walk in the open air of what they called the light world for a time, and had found more than they had bargained for. Dozens of landing craft skimmed the surface of the planet, following rivers and shallow valleys, clipping the tops of trees, and sending sprays of sand and water into the air along the coast as they flew in search of an unexpected and unexpectedly dangerous quarry. Meanwhile, beneath the choppy grey surface, the Long Way roared to life. Her thrusters flash-boiled the water behind her to steam, adding the force of its sudden buoyancy and expansion to her rapid rise to the surface. Her sleek prow broke the water's surface ahead of even the first signs that she was stirring below, and, in the blink of an eye, she dragged thousands of glittering droplets of glittering water into the suddenly foggy air behind her. It was almost as if the world bid her farewell, as the Long Way sped straight towards the upper atmosphere with all possible speed. It really was a shame that the only people around were far too much in the middle of the display to appreciate it. In fact, the man who made such a spectacle was too busy with the tandem tasks of piloting the Long Way and instructing the boy who'd shown more than a little natural talent, and a lot more grit in honing that talent. "Look, you tell her to take that position here. Then you have it to estimate the MSD to take into account our speed and heading to get our potential calc origin points, and then pre-run a couple hundred calcs. And once we hit MSD, the Long Way will have already eliminated the red calcs, and you can rerun and punch it on amber. You got it?" Cadet clicked his beak nervously and said, "Yeah, but why is this the only 10-minute jump?" "Because I'm finally taking this seriously," Vincent answered. "Wake tracking a small ship like the Long Way is hard, but not impossible. We do a couple quick jumps to different locations to make picking up our wake harder, and then we follow our real course." "Do you think they'd follow us here?" Vincent sent the Long Way into a banking twist to prevent a lock-on from a landing craft blatantly attempting to get onto the Long Way's tail, as he said. "Probably not. My guess is that they were there to get... well, yeah. Still, they might try to follow us this time, so might as well make it harder for them." "Oh," Cadet said softly as the Long Way banked the other way, gracefully under Vincent's steady hands. "How do you do that?" Cadet asked suddenly. "Practice, mostly. You'll get there." Vincent kept half an eye on Cadet as the boy worked to follow his instructions, and the rest of his attention was kept on the landing craft below's flagging pursuit and making sure the way ahead remained clear. "Like that?" the boy asked tentatively as he tapped the screen with a winged claw. "Yeah," Vincent said with cool focus. "Good job. If you want, you can try practicing some maneuvers before we take our final translation." "Really?" Cadet asked excitedly. "Sure," Vincent said. "I've planned enough short hops that even the Republican Navy would have a hard time following a ship 4 times as big as the Long Way." While Vincent piloted on the bridge, in the galley, Jason gritted his teeth against the grunt of pain that attempted to escape his throat. He'd bumped his broken arm against the sofa's armrest again, and even though he'd taken his painkillers, bumping the arm still sent shocks of agony up his arm. Vincent hadn't even had the grav generator shut off to get more speed, so he had his own awkward self and his unfamiliarity of having a splintered arm to blame. He was aware of Isis Magdalene on the other side of the sofa, groping the shoulder straps of her safety webbing and very obviously going through some calming breathing exercises. Jason was still relieved that asking her to buckle in before takeoff had worked. So far as Jason was concerned, just one chat about what had happened on the planet they were leaving behind wasn't likely to be enough for the nascent noblewoman to, well, Jason figured that cope would be the best word for what she needed to do. Not that they'd had much time for much else. Still, though, he was pretty worried over her. Then, of course, Isis Magdalene wasn't the only one to be worried about. Vi had hardly taken her wide and frightened eyes off of Jason since he and Isis Magdalene had emerged from the girl's cabin to get strapped in, which was how she knew that Jason had needed to help getting buckled in. But that wasn't so bad. What worried Jason was that Vi was clearly terrified right to her marrow that Jason might get hurt again at any time. What worried him more was the fact that there wasn't much he could do about that at the moment. At least Trondre was too busy manning the engine room to worry about him. When Jason heard the distinctive pitch change of the hyperdrive spooling up, he moved to unbuckle himself. But Vincent's voice came back over the intercom. "Stay strapped in. We're doing some short jumps and cadets going to practice maneuvers before we translate for our trip." Jason let out a sigh at the change of plan, or rather at the fact that he didn't think of that, and settled in to ride strapped in for a while longer. A redundant translations back and forth between real space and hyperspace, see you later, and Jason was wishing that the long way had a bigger bridge. Despite the grav generator still being on, he could feel the G-forces generated by the sharp changes of momentum tug on him against alternatively his safety webbing and the cushions of the couch. It was probably a little more impressive if one could see the readouts or to track the maneuvers. Then the hyperdrive spooled up once again, and Jason worked to unbuckle himself one-handed, which thankfully went a little better than trying to extricate himself. Once again, Jason clamped his teeth shut over a cry of pain. It came out as something between a snarl and a grunt as he fumblingly tried to untangle his immobile arm. "Jason!" he heard Vi cry out, quickly followed by the sound of her scampering towards him. "I'm fine," Jason growled, then realized what the pain had done to his voice and then said more mildly, I'll be okay." "Please," Vi said as she started helping Jason. "It's okay." Jason let a wry grin spread on his face as he said, "Too bad I didn't lose my arm and break my eye instead." "That's not funny," Vi mumbled as Jason's arm was finally freed. "Jason, that's not funny at all." Jason turned his eye to at last look at her and saw she was once again holding back tears. So he put back a sigh and told her, "I'm sorry, Vi. I'm just trying to make him. I won't say something like that again." Jason felt her stubby arm squeeze him around the middle and patted her back with his good arm as he told her, "I don't like you getting hurt." "Me either, Vi. Funnily enough, getting hurts," Jason said, with a wry grin creeping back onto his face. That got the girl to giggle as she let him go and said, I'm going to get started on dinner." Isis Magdalene broke a long silence to say, as if she hadn't heard the exchange, "I shall assist as I can, should you only instruct me on the how of it." "If you're up for it," Vi answered as Jason took a couple stretching steps towards the engine room. At least out there, he generally didn't try to help because he didn't know what Trondre was doing. "Hey, Tran," he said as he carefully walked down the ladder to find his cousin winding the safety tethers back into their anchor points. "I guess the enemy didn't think that we'd be hiding under the water," Trondre commented as she turned to look at Jason with an openly appraising eye. "I didn't have to do anything this time." "I figure you're right, Tran. I'm grateful for that," Jason soberly told her as she cast his eye around for somewhere comfortable to lean or sit. "I think you ought to take it easy, Jason," his cousin told him seriously. Jason clapped his hand at her and told her, "I know. I know. If I was up there, I'd want to help by washing dishes or carrying things or reaching into high cabinets." "So you came down here for what?" "You know I'm going above deck to help Vi," she said bluntly. Jason couldn't quite meet her eyes as the excuse he'd come down with evaporated. "I don't know. I just don't want to sit around and watch everyone else work." "I did a little reading while we were waiting for you to wake up," Trondre seriously said. "After a week, we'll probably be able to resplit it in a splint with a bent elbow. I promise I'll have it ready in time." "Thanks. It'll get better, Tran. Broken bones heal. And we humans are pretty sturdy." "I know that in my head. In my head, but it's just you. Maybe if I'd listened to your mom's lessons better." "Did you stop and think about what the alternative would be?" "How do you mean?" "Well," Jason began, "if I didn't fight, what would have happened? Isis Magdalene would have been taken. The word of the George family would have been broken, and our honor strained. That, and maybe I'd have been taken too, or if I was lucky, dead. If you didn't give first aid and clean my wounds, what would have happened? Maybe I get an infection. Maybe my arm heals wrong, or not at all. And maybe the eye goes septic and kills me. Tran, you can't compare what happened to I don't know, a perfect thing that couldn't happen anyway." Trondre's eyes drifted to the alien yoke for a moment before she looked at Jason again to say, "I know. Knowing doesn't stop feeling, though. Why is that? I dislike that my feelings do not agree with what I know." "You're not a machine, Tran. Even Digitans struggle with that sometimes, you know," Jason gently told her. I dislike it anyway. Speaking of," Trondre said bluntly, "you'll have to spend this whole trip taking it easy. I shall be very cross with you if you don't." "Ooh, scary," Jason teased. "I mean it," Trondre said sternly. "I know. Thanks, Tran." Trondre gave her cousin a stern look on her way up the ladder, spoiled somewhat by the poorly suppressed grin brought to the fore by Jason's humor. Thus, Jason found himself alone for the moment. as alone as a boy could be in a place that was someone else's haunt. He cast his eyes around the engine room to the orderly workbench beside Vincent's armory and narrowed his eyes at his splintered left arm. "If you weren't busted, I could spend an hour or so at the whetstone." It didn't answer him, unless one counted the twinge of pain leaping from his fingertips to his elbow. He let out a deep sigh and picked out a section of bulkhead without any equipment and sat on the deck against it on the deck. The sound of the long-way systems filled his ears. His young mind brought the battle up into the fore. His heart raced, his pupils narrowed, and he nearly saw the grub victims closing in on Isis Magdalene and him again. He asked himself what if he'd put down more of them in the opening. He asked himself what if he'd run away longer. He asked himself what if, and what if, and what if, until his mind raced, and only the homey drone of the long-way systems answered him. Then, to his surprise, Vi called to him, "Jason, dinner's ready. Are you hungry?" Jason hauled himself to his feet and called up, "Aye, I'm coming. Thanks, Vi," and put on what he thought was the usual cheer to have dinner. To be fair to the boy, he was looking forward to getting dinner. He was more than a little hungry, and Vi had put a lot of work into making mincemeat in absence of a meat grinder to make the approximation of hamburgers. They'd long since run out of cheese, but they'd found some kind of mushroom, or something that looked like mushrooms, but nevertheless rendered fat when cooked over the stove, which Vi and Trundra had used to saute the bulbs that were somewhere between onions and garlic. And the resultant sauce was poured over the burgers before the top bun of toasted bread was put in place. He only had to pretend at high spirits until he took his first bite. The concerned glances of all the other children, while Vincent was on watch, hardly bothered him at all. Then Jason ran into trouble trying to make up his bed for the night. Pressing a button to fold the dinette down was easy enough, but stretching the fitted sheet out over the bed, one-handed, was anything but smooth. The corners kept slipping out when he began to stretch it to the far side. What had been a matter of rote took less than a minute, had become an ordeal of nearly a quarter hour. He managed it without accepting help, though, so there was that. By the time Jason fell asleep, he thought it did not bode well for his recovery. Not that it exactly boded ill either, but he couldn't remember going to bed so irritated in his young life. His dour assessment of his own independence was somewhat overblown. Over the next few days, he found that his most vital functions could be handled without help from the other children, which he was profoundly grateful for. Matters of hygiene, getting dressed, eating his food, and a few other things were simple enough to adapt to use of only a dominant arm. And things like folding his bedding, washing up the dishes, or taking watch on the bridge were beyond his diminished abilities. Although he thought if push came to shove, he would be able to fight with one hand on the yoke, but by no means wanted to be pushed into that particular shove. This gave him more time for reading, which was a close second to his preference for leisure, to spending time with a heavy bag in the weight room. However, seeing the state of his arm, reading was going to be his go-to for the time being, which isn't to say that he found it an easy thing to adapt to, as his lack of eye made focusing on the text of one of Vincent's tablet screens surprisingly difficult. That particular challenge was localized inside his head, and was therefore entirely private, which Jason preferred in any case. He persisted privately, and just as privately relished pleasure at overcoming a challenge wholly on his own. He'd even decided to read On Republican Ethics on Gideon Unchained George, a famously challenging work detailing the various ethical systems that an adoptee observed in operation within the Republic at various points of his life. Its many thought-provoking passages provided prolific pausing opportunities to both think and give his eye a rest. Yet, as the week dragged on, even that was not enough. Therefore, once he was finally restless enough, Jason made his way to the bridge during the time that would have been his shift. "You're supposed to be taking it easy, Chief," Vincent said to him as the hatch cycle closed behind him. I am," Jason said, as he sank into the co-pilot's chair. "You tell me where's a better place to board to watch hyperspace slip by." "Fair enough," Vincent said, with a considering look. The silence between them was filled with droning or hum of the long way, and Jason's vision was filled with the chaotic kaleidoscope of colors caused by the bubble of reality projected by the ship's hyperdrive colliding with the ravages of hyperspace, until the old man said, "Out with it." "Out with what?" Jason grunted. "What's bothering you?" "The arm," Jason admitted, "and, take your time." "Turn and turn about," Jason sighed. I can't help as much as being all busted up as I am." "And you, helping out is very, you." "Aye, it's very me," Jason answered, before letting the long way fill the silence between them with a hum. I meant what I said earlier, Vincent said at length, that you don't need your hands for Boa best help. Aye, I know, Jason said quietly, as he settled deeper into a comfortable posture. It's not as easy to do things with one hand as I thought. Tran said she's working on a model for a splint that'll let me use a sling, though, so I'll figure that'll help some. Kid, Vincent said carefully, aren't you the one who says nobody does anything alone? Sure, Jason said. But that's more of a philosophy thing. If you want to get pedantic, I sure as shit don't need or want anyone wiping my own ass. Oh, swearing now. I'm grumpy, Jason said with petulance. I figure I get to be grumpy over this. Still funny. Jason gave his adopted uncle the best one-eyed scowl. It was spoiled somewhat by the crooked grin breaking through beneath it. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.